Welcome back everyone, it is Mike from Mana Hoarders, bringing you a commander deck tech for a mono red commander from Phyrexia, all will be one, Solphim, Mayhem, Dominus. You can cast this commander for 2 and 2 red, you get a 5/4 legendary Phyrexian Horror. The ability reads, if a source you control will deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. We can also pay 1 and 2 Phyrexian red to discard 2 cards and put an indestructible counter on this commander. Before we dive into the deck, let's go over a few key points. First up, the final price for this build came in at $73.88. This does include the price of our commander and all of our lands. Now, do bear in mind, some of these prices will vary greatly depending on the quality of the cards you purchase, the vendor you use, and a variety of other factors. And while I have you, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the awesome commander deck techs we have coming to you in the future. Now let's go ahead and dive into the deck. First up are our artifacts. Endless Atlas, we can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, but we can only activate this if we control 3 or more lands with the same name. Lucky for us, we're playing mono red, so Mountain is the name of the game. Fellowar Stone, it can tap to give us 1 mana of any color a land an opponent controls could produce. We mostly included it just because it's a 2 mana mana rock. Fire Diamond enters the battlefield tapped, but it can also tap to give us a red mana. Hazoret's Monument makes our red creature spells cost 1 less, and whenever we cast a creature spell, we can discard a card, and if we do, we get to draw 1. Mind Stone taps for a colorless, we can also pay 1 and sacrifice it to draw a card. And Skull Cage, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep it deals 2 damage to that player unless he or she has exactly 3 or 4 cards in their hand. Sol Ring taps for 2 colorless mana. In Wayfarer's Bauble we can pay 2 and tap it to sacrifice it, search our library for a basic land card, and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Moving on to our creatures, we do have some legends helping out our commander. Torbrand, Thane of Redfell. If a red source we control will deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. And Zerzoth, Chaos Rider. Whenever an opponent draws their first card each turn, if it's not their turn, we create a 1/1 red devil creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. Also, whenever 1 or more devils we control attack 1 or more players, we and that player each draw a card and then discard a card at random. And for our not-so-legendary creatures, Blister Spit Gremlin, we can pay 1 and tap it and deal 1 damage to each opponent, and whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we can untap it. Brash Taunter has Indestructible, whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target opponent, and we can pay 2 and a red and tap it and it can fight another target creature. Brimstone Vandal has Menace, if it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as it enters the battlefield, and whenever it switches from day to night, or night to day, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Chandra's Incinerator, it costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to our opponents this turn. It has Trample, it also happens to be a 6/6, but whenever a source we control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, the Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. Defiler of Instinct has First Strike, it helps us ramp out some of our creatures by paying life instead of that red mana, and whenever we cast a red permanent spell, it deals 1 damage to any target. Electrostatic Field, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, each of our opponents are going to take 1. Fanatic of Mogus, whenever it enters the battlefield, it deals damage to each opponent equal to our devotion to red. Firebrand Archer, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, deals 1 damage to each opponent. Gibbering Fiend will deal 1 damage to each opponent whenever it enters the battlefield. Glint Horn Buccaneer has Haste, whenever we discard a card, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and we can pay 1 and a red and discard a card to draw, but we can only activate this if the Buccaneer is attacking. Gutter Snipe, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, deals 2 damage to each opponent. Harsh Mentor, whenever an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature, or land on the battlefield, if it is not a mana ability, the Mentor deals 2 damage to that player. Now this next creature might seem a little bit weird, but let me explain. Hostility is a 6/6 elemental incarnation with haste. If a spell we control will deal damage to an opponent, prevent that damage, then we create a 3/1 red elemental shaman creature token with haste for each 1 damage prevented this way. Now, for example, if we were playing against opponents with very creature-heavy decks, and honestly the damage we're dealing is not enough to take them out, we can generate a lot of blockers onto our board. Or if we are trying to rebuild after a board wipe, this is a great way to get a ton of bodies on board, and actually deal a lot of damage very quickly since they are 3/1s with haste. Kessig Flame Breather, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Lamehold Raconteur does much the same thing, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1. Quakebringer, it makes it so our opponents can't gain life, and at the beginning of our upkeep, it deals 2 damage to each opponent, but this ability only triggers if it's on the battlefield or if it's in our graveyard and we control a giant. Red Dragon, a personal favorite of mine, so sweet and so simple. It enters the battlefield and deals 4 damage to each opponent, but with our commander that'll be dealing 8 damage. Runaway Steamkin, whenever we cast a red spell, if it has fewer than 3 1/1 counters, it gets a 1/1 counter. But we can also remove 3 +1/+1 counters to generate 3 red mana. Solemn Simulacrum enters the battlefield and we get a basic land on the battlefield tapped, and whenever it dies we can draw. Spear Spewer, we can tap it to deal 1 damage to each player. Stuffy Doll, whenever it enters the battlefield we choose a player, and whenever Stuffy Doll takes damage, that player takes that much damage as well, but with our commander it's doubled. Tectonic Giant, whenever it attacks or becomes a target of a spell an opponent controls, we can choose one of the following abilities. It deals 3 damage to each opponent, or we can exile the top 2 cards of our library, choose one, and until the end of our next turn we can play that card. Thermo Alchemist, we can tap it to deal 1 damage to each opponent, and whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we can untap him. Thundering Raiju has haste. Whenever it attacks, we put a 1/1 counter on target creature we control. Then the Raiju deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures we control other than Thundering Raiju. Tunneling Geopede, whenever we play a land, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Voldaren Epicure enters the battlefield, deals 1 damage to each opponent, and we get a blood token. And Witty Roastmaster, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Moving on to our enchantments, Aether Flash. Whenever a creature comes into play, Aether Flash deals 2 damage to it. Circle of Flame. Whenever a creature without flying attacks you or a planeswalker you control, Circle of Flame deals 1 damage to that creature. Impact Tremors. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, the Tremors deal 1 damage to each opponent. Kumano faces Kakazan. The first lore counter deals 1 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control. The second one, whenever we cast our next creature spell, it enters with an additional 1/1 counter. And for the third one, we will exile it and return it to the battlefield transformed. Roiling Vortex pings each player for 1 damage at the beginning of their upkeep, and whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, they take 5 damage. We can also pay a red, and it makes it so our opponents can't gain life that turn. Sulfuric Vortex, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, it deals 2 damage to that player, and if a player would gain life, that player gains no life instead. And the Elder Dragon War. The first lore counter deals 2 damage to each creature and each opponent. The second one, we can discard any number of cards and then draw that many, and the third one would get a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. For our instance, Big Score, we can discard a card to draw 2 and get 2 treasure tokens. Blood Oath, we choose a card type, target opponent reveals his or her hand, and then Blood Oath deals 3 damage to that player for each card of the chosen type revealed this way. Desperate Ritual gives us 3 red mana. Pyretic Ritual does the same. Risk Factor, for 3 damage, target opponent can have Risk Factor deal 4 damage to them, and if they do not, we get to draw 3 cards. So it is important to note that for 3 mana and our commander on the board, they are either taking 8 or letting us draw 3 cards. Also, we can jumpstart this, so we can cast it from our graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other costs, and then we exile it, so potentially getting more card draw or more damage from 1 card. Seething Song gives us 5 red mana. Thrill of Possibility, we can discard a card to draw 2. And Unexpected Windfall, we will discard a card to draw 2 and get 2 treasure tokens. Moving on to our sorceries, Browbeat. Any player may have Browbeat deal 5 damage to him or her. If no one does, target player draws 3 cards. Cathartic Reunion, we discard 2 cards to draw 3. Earthquake, it deals X damage to each creature without flying and each player. And the Festivities, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. Fiery Confluence, we can choose 3 and we may choose the same mode more than once. Deal 1 damage to each creature, 2 damage to each opponent, or destroy target artifact. Fiery Gambit, we flip a coin until we lose a flip or choose to stop flipping. If we lose a flip, it has no effect. If we win 1 or more, it deals 3 damage to target creature. If we win 2 or more, it deals 6 damage to each opponent. And if we win 3 or more flips, we draw 9 cards and untap all lands we control. Mishra's Command, we choose 2. Target player can discard up to X cards, then draw a card for each card discarded this way. Deal X damage to target creature, X damage to target planeswalker, or target creature gets +X+0 and gains haste. Mizium Mortars, it deals 4 damage to target creature we don't control, or we can overload it to deal that much damage to each creature we don't control. Seize the Spoils, we discard a card to draw 2 and get a treasure token. Sizzle deals 3 damage to each opponent. Spiteful Repossession, it deals damage to each opponent who controls more lands than us equal to the difference. Then we get a number of treasure tokens equal to the damage dealt this way. and Tormenting Voice. We discard a card to draw 2 cards. And last but not least is our mana base. We will be keeping things very basic with 35 basic mountains. And just like that, we reached the end of this Commander deck tech for Solphim, Mayhem, Dominus. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, tell your friends about us, and leave a comment down below. Let us know what commanders you would like to see us build around in the future. I really appreciate all of your support.